Hey everyone, we're live now on Truthscript Tuesday. I'm your host, John Harris. I have my brother with me, the president of Truthscript, David Harris. How you doing, David?
Howdy, howdy. Doing very well.
So this is going to be a longer episode just because I haven't done a Truthscript Tuesday in a few weeks, and I apologize for that. I want to do more. I want to do it every week, actually, or at least have someone do it if it's not me. But last few weeks have been very hectic, and part of that is the weekend, this previous weekend and the weekend before that, I was at conferences sponsored by Truthscript, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So here's kind of the agenda, just for people who are curious about where this podcast is going. We're going to talk a little bit about what Truthscript has done, what we'd like to do, give you a little bit of a debrief on the conferences that we just attended. David was actually with me at the one over the weekend in Wisconsin. And then we'll go over some articles, and we have a number of articles to go over. We're going to start with one that David wrote, so he'll talk about it, and actually end with one that I wrote that just came out today. So lots of good topics, the theological, political, cultural, familial. I don't know what other O's, but there's some of them. There's a bunch of them. So David, first question, I figure we'll just start on this since it's fresh in our minds. How'd you enjoy the conference in DeForest? Not DeForest, sorry. I'm mixing up my places in Wisconsin. In St. Croix Falls. You're wearing the hat, actually. Yours says Wisconsin. Okay, mine said St. Croix. So
mine's more general. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a now a Wisconsin appreciator. So the conference was really, really great. It's Pastor Seth is just a great guy. He's a joy to be around. He's really got the joy of the Lord. And he treated us very, very well. And St. Croix Falls is an interesting place. It's one of those towns that, like in a Midwestern sense, there's quite a few. I've been to a lot of southern towns like it, but it's still very much like old America. So it was cool just being in that area. It's rural farmland, beautiful countryside, and just really down to earth people. So there was probably like 140, 150 people there. Some people had come in from the local area. Some people one guy, shout out to Matt, came all the way from Georgia. So he flew in. But it was a great time. Obviously, you talked, John. You had a couple of sessions. Dr. Fuller, Russell Fuller was there. He had two. And then there was Jeff. I'm blanking on his last name. Jeff was there, Pastor Jeff.
Yeah, no, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, and why am I blanking now? It's like a contagion.
Sorry, Jeff,
now.
If you're listening, we apologize. I blanked on your name.
Jeff is going to be so mad now.
Klein. Wow, that is embarrassing. I mean,
we're live, so you can't actually edit.
I know I can't take it back.
It's just so his name, his last name, and I should have asked him this because I heard that they were talking about ethnicities and where's your ancestry, but go back to and stuff. And I somehow missed someone got my attention and I missed what he was saying. So his last name, I think it's pronounced Cleaver, but if I pronounced that, I apologize. But I'm not sure if that's doesn't sound German. So I'm trying to place it myself. Because usually if you know where someone's from, you can like get the pronunciation right. But
it's not English. That's all we know. It's not English. That's kind of as far as my understanding.
As far as we go. Jeff Cleaver, the mystery man.
But I didn't know much about his story. I didn't know much about what had gone on with him in the Evangelical Free Church. So just getting to know him and hear his story is definitely worth doing. And we'll be posting those over the next few days, the sessions. David Wheaton was there too. He's has a radio show out of the Twin Cities. He's a former tennis player, I believe. So he also did a session. We had a Q&A with some interesting questions. And John, I think your talks were probably the most the most confusing for people because
thanks.
But they were good. I think you'll have to stretch these things out. But you were talking about the liberal order and sort of how that manifests itself in our current evangelical landscape. So it's a very timely topic. We'll we'll need a lot more on it. I think we're going to need a lot more work on that particular issue. But Dr. Fuller, when Dr. Fuller talks, he really makes Hebrew Old Testament passages that you've never thought of. He makes them very much come alive, and he's a very soft spoken. He's not fire and brimstone at all. He's kind of talks very academically, but he hooks you in an incredible way. So yeah, absolutely fantastic time. I hope we do it again, and if we do, then you should come.
Yeah, I had a great time too, and Jeff was just super nice, down to earth guy, and he's only actually like 4 hours from where I live, so we'll probably try to meet up at some point. And Dr. Fuller's presentation was great, and maybe everyone was timid to say that mine were confusing. You're the only ones that actually said that, but I think with the Christian nationalism debate, a lot of people are considering alternative political viewpoints. And when I mean alternative, I mean actually viewpoints that may have been standard for a long time until recently, until the liberal order. So I really tried to explain in the time I had what the liberal order was, what the Christian alternative to the liberal order is, and just some practical things that we can do to, after we're aware of it, kind of combat it and shield our families from it. So I had a great time being in the area. And I was going to mention this on the ride home, or the plane ride. They have movies and stuff for free. And there was a movie, and I don't usually recommend movies. And we're going to end this podcast with a review of honestly a terrible movie. But there was a movie on the plane called The Boys in the Boat that I watched. And it's one of the best movies I've seen in years. It was really, really, really good. So shout out to just parents out there who are looking for movies for their children. I would say this is probably more of a teenager level movie, but it's a good movie. It's pretty clean, really good morals. Historically, I mean, I haven't read the book, so I don't know exactly how accurate, but I think it's fairly accurate. So good movie.
So I actually almost I flew back to Tennessee on Sunday night. You flew back Monday morning, if I'm not mistaken. So I was looking through. I flew Delta, and I was looking through movies, and I almost watched that because I had heard somebody wrote a review that it was really good. I'm not usually super into sports movies, but I realized I had never seen the film A Beautiful Mind, so I watched that instead. And I was actually thoroughly disappointed, which I'm probably going to make people upset for saying that. I thought it was about a guy with autism, not schizophrenia. So the whole time I was like, he has schizophrenia? I thought he had autism. And so, yeah, that was kind of a disappointment for me. But okay, I guess I should have watched The Boys in the Boat.
You didn't remember Jeff Cleaver's, or I think it's Cleaver, his last name. You said my talks are confusing, and now you're just knocking A Beautiful Mind because it didn't have, the star wasn't autistic.
I'm here to drop grenades.
Okay. Well,
forget to drop grenades.
Well, I can't remember when I saw that. It was a long time ago, but I actually remember kind of liking that movie. So I don't know enough to argue with you about why it was good or bad, because I don't remember the story well enough, but I remember liking it at the end. So there you go. Maybe we'll have a debate on A Beautiful Mind. Well, we have a few articles to get to, but right before we do that, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about the conference I went to. David wasn't there, but we were in Idaho, in Boise, Idaho, and Danny Steinmeier, pastor who's on the board of Truthscript, hosted that conference, and Matt Slick was there. He spoke with us, and we had a really good time. And it was spiritual warfare. That was the topic. And the sessions, 4 of them are available online now. I haven't linked to them because not all of them are up yet, but when they're up, we're going to link to it at Truthscript. We're also going to link to all the audio recordings of the conference that we just were talking about. And that's all going to be at truthscript.com. It's not posted there yet, but it will be. And we do want to do more events like this. And both Pastor Seth Brickley and Danny Steinmeier were gracious to fly the banner of Truthscript over these conferences. And, maybe they had a few extra people come because of the advertisement. It was online. It was on truthscript.com as well. I'm not sure, but they really believe in what Truthscript is doing. And this was their generosity, frankly, to allow us to be there, to have a booth at both places. We want to get into a position, and we're actually already there, I suppose, in some respects, where we can essentially put a lot of money into big events, and big and small, but just put money there. So Truthscript can actually like rent out a hotel lobby or a space wherever that may be, and really just sponsor the whole thing. Pay for speakers to come and stuff. And we're not quite there. We really appreciate the generous donations, but I know, David, you're in talks for a potential conference in 2026. We can't really share probably details about, but
Not yet.
we're looking to get there pretty soon. So just thank you. That's a big thank you to both those pastors and for all the support that's come in. Other than that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about future plans for Truthscript. And maybe, David, you want to talk about this, and then I'll share just a little thing that I had. But maybe talk about, because you presented on this, what you expect to see in the coming months and years.
Sure. Yeah. So, I got to talk a little bit about this at the conference in Wisconsin. So we're publishing articles right now, and that's that's the main thing that keeps me busy is the scheduling, editing. And you'll notice sometimes probably that some weeks there's like 3 or 4, and some weeks there's 1 or 2, and that's contingent mostly on myself and our other volunteers, how much time we have to get things done. So everyone is working full-time jobs, and this is something that they're doing on the side. So one of the goals for and if you do donate to Truthscript, then would be one of the main aims is that we can pay people for their time. I'm hoping so that sometime in the nearest future that I could do this full time, could dedicate all my time to this. We're not quite there yet, but and then we can expand into other media areas. We talked about some of these possibilities over the weekend, but there's a lot of demand for thoughtful written material, but also film and longer audio programs and things that a lot of organizations like Focus on the Family, the Gospel Coalition, even Christianity Today have done like very successfully. It's just that a lot of more conservative evangelicals have tuned out because they don't feel like they can trust what they're hearing. On a sort of grand level, on a macro level, we want to sort of fill that gap. We want to come in and be a ministry that produces stuff that you can rely on, that you can trust to have theological fidelity and be true to the Word of God.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. One of the things that I mentioned before we started recording is that, and I'm trying to be vague about this, but there are some guys, some academics who would love to see a more scholarly organization, I guess, educational organization form that can articulate Christian theology and articles on culture and those kinds of things, but on a more scholarly level. Now, this is different than what Truthscript is about, right? Truthscript is about really short, more simple articles. But if there's someone out there listening who happens to be affluent and you would like to see something like that's unapologetically conservative, let me know. And you see the Gospel Coalition, they have a wing actually for academic. They have an academic journal essentially on their website as well, connected to them. American Reformers doing good work, but the thing about American Reformer is they do pretty much focus on culture and political issues, which is great. However, there are also theological issues that we would love to be able to write about, and so I can give more details to anyone if they're curious about that and what we're looking at. But that is a possibility. There's a lot of possibilities if the resources are there. So just throwing that out there. All right. Well, let me just say, if you want to donate to Truthscript directly, you can go to truthscript.com. Scroll down is a 501c3. Click the donate tab. And if you want to publish with us, click the publish tab, you'll see the requirements for that. And we've really located some great writers who probably would not be published anywhere of standing if it weren't for Truthscript. At least some of them, I would imagine. And so, there was a guy at the conference, David. I don't know if you talked to him, but just super smart guy. I think he's probably smarter than me. He's like, as far as like reading more on political and social and religious issues. We just had a very educated conversation, I felt. And I asked him what he did for a living, and he said, I'm a painter. And, and I have 2 master's degrees, and I don't think he probably went to college. And
I did talk to him. Yeah.
Very smart guy.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the future. This is what we're seeing is more and more people, the academy's blocking people out who are truly conservative Christian. And you're finding that people are listening to podcasts and books and all kinds of things as they're working these blue collar jobs, and they're giving themselves an education. And I just think it's a wonderful thing. So I'm trying to,
it's going to be, like you said, it's going to be, that's going to be, and that's sort of another area that Truthscript comes in. I mean, we had an article, I mentioned this on Sunday. We had an article come in. It's on the website. I'm blinking on the name of the piece, but it was by a guy who, it was about imprecatory Psalms. It was about praying imprecatory Psalms. And it was written by a guy who lives near the Twin Cities where we just were. And he wrote it from the perspective of somebody who's doing maintenance on the Capitol building. And he was watching the legislatures come in and thinking about imprecatory Psalms because the Minnesota State Capitol did some absolutely horrific things over the last year. Was he there?
I don't know. I didn't have anyone come to me and say that, but if he was close enough, I wonder if he was.
Yeah. So you have you have people like that, and there's a lot of examples. I mean, a lot of the I mean, you right? You were a furniture repairman, and now you're doing this. So.
Well, I suppose I'm unconventional, but I also did do 2 master's degrees. So I probably, if I hadn't put out all the information I did on politically incorrect topics, it's possible, that I would be working as an adjunct somewhere at probably a community college, to be quite frank. Education jobs are very hard to come by. But there are people people who are genuinely blue collar in every respect, and they aren't published. They need places, I think, to publish their works. Some of them are really good. And so that's what Truthscript, one of the things that Truthscript provides. All right, well, let's look at some of this. We have some articles that I want to go over. First one, David, is all you. This is an article called, "Is It Time for Red State Relocation? Thinking Biblically About the Big Sort." So I'll just let you take it away.
Sure. So I wrote this thinking about a lot of things that had happened in my own life, in the life of my family over the last 2 years or so. And just trying to sort through, how do you make this? This is such a big decision, but there's not, it's constantly referenced, but I've seen very, very little deliberately Christian responses to this phenomenon. So that's the big sort, the phenomenon of the big sorts. People are moving from all over the place, and the effect that this mass migration is having on churches is profound. I mean, the Seth Brickley's church had a handful of people just a few years ago, and now they're busting out the building. So there's been just massive shifts, by and large, because of the big sort. So I kind of talk a little bit in this article about my own experience. I lived in upstate New York, was very content there, was kind of at the point where I would have been happy staying there for my life. And then COVID vaccine comes out. My wife gets fired from her hospital job. It's not really financially tenable, so we kind of are between a rock and a hard place. We decide to move. And then I had to seek a lot of counsel, talk to a lot of people to try to come to this decision of, is this the right thing to do? How do I sort of discern God's will in this situation? So this is meant to be a really practical thing. At the end of this article are a bunch of questions you can ask yourself if you're making a pros cons list for moving yourself. And there's a lot of people that I personally know right now that are in the beginning stages of relocating somewhere else. So a few questions, for example, how will this move affect my family, both immediate and extended? That's something that I address that really has become a significant issue. If we take that verse seriously, he who doesn't provide for his family is worse than an unbeliever. Understanding that that's not just referring to your immediate family, but also that would be your extended family as well, at least some of your extended family. How do you take that seriously if you're relocating? Because we're also winding up with a situation where people are very fractured. So we have people living all over the United States, and it's hard, especially in economically difficult times. It's a lot harder to rely on each other and take care of your own when you're geographically very far from one another. So sorting that question out. And then I also talk about churches. So what churches are in the area that don't compromise on basic biblical truth. And one of the things I said when I was thinking through this, because obviously church is extremely important. It's not smart to move somewhere. Like, you probably wouldn't just move to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia and expect to find a church, but you live in the United States, and there are a lot of churches all over the place, but a lot of people have moved, they've relocated, and they've had difficulty in that area. Where do I go to church? So trying to apply grace to that situation. So you move, and you are not going to find perfection. And if perfection is what you want, and the place that you currently attend is the perfect church, and it lines up with you 100% in every doctrine, probably you shouldn't move, or maybe you should reconsider moving, because it's a guarantee that wherever you go, there will be differences. They're going to do things a little bit differently. That will be something that you'll have to sort if you do commit to moving. So, all that to say is this piece is to try to help you work through those issues if that's something that you are faced with.
All right. Very, very good. The next article. So this is a practical article, and a lot of people are. By the way, Hudson Valley was really pretty today. I went on a very pretty long bike ride. It was just stunning. So, not to make you feel
sounds nice.
Not to make you feel too bad. All right,
weaponizing. We're in deep summer now, so.
Oh yeah, it's definitely still spring here, and
good for you.
If I have Rosie's been running all over the living room, so I had to get up and catch her. She's in my lap right now, and
yeah, that is not his child. That is his rabbit.
Yeah. If you can see, there's Rosie. This is professional right now.
Very professional. I feel like I need to find an animal, but all I have is a daughter.
Well, she's a toddler, so there's some similarities, perhaps.
Yeah, but I don't show her face on the world.
Oh, that's probably wise.
Yeah.
All right, weaponizing Matthew 18 is the next one, and that's by Pastor Seth Brickley, who hosted the conference over the weekend. All right, so this is a topic that got brought up recently because of, in fact, Seth and I were talking about this along with Jeff and John, one of the pastors, elders at his church. This whole Mark Driscoll thing, where where Mark Driscoll essentially gets up on stage at a conference and starts rebuking the conference, or I guess rebuking what he saw as a inappropriate thing that happened at the conference. And the organizer of the conference got up and he just said, well, you're violating Matthew 18. That was his first go-to because Mark didn't talk to him. So this gets brought up quite a bit, but it's really like it's a misunderstanding of Matthew 18 and what Matthew 18, the purpose of Matthew 18, really. So Seth says in this particular article, he says that it's commonly heard in Matthew 7:1, do not judge lest you be judged. Many don't know their Bible well and enough to know about what this verse actually means. They take it out of context. They try to make the verse say that it's wrong to tell someone to refrain from sinning. To do so is judgmental and unloving, though the Bible clearly admonishes people. And Matthew 18 is kind of used in a similar fashion. He says there are many examples of corrupt leaders in Christian institutions and churches weaponizing this verse. And the effort is to take the blame off the guilty and heap it on the one sinning, or shining the light on the sinful actions, rather. Several years ago, he talks about a pastor who had a sinful past that was brought to light, a woman who was involved he was involved with years before, spoke out publicly to reveal that he had been adulterous. All the disqualified pastor could say when confronted was she didn't follow Matthew 18. So I've actually had this used on me. I don't know if you've had it used on you, David, but when I first started doing the podcast, the other podcast I do, Conversations That Matter, there were people who accused me of that. In fact, I remember one prominent pastor, but behind the scenes, reached out to me and said, you really ought to talk to some of these people that you're talking about, and I'm analyzing public statements that they've made and exposing them and refuting them. But he said one of them in particular is using it against you, John, because you've never come to him. And so that's the thing he tells everyone is, well, John's never come to me, as if that's supposed to be somehow a cut against me. Like I haven't followed what scripture has said to do here. So the article corrects this, and it does so by setting it in the context. So it's addressing a local church context where one individual sins against another. The individual who has been sinned against is to go personally to speak to the offender. And this happens in 1 Corinthians 5, an example of it. And it says when an individual or Christian organization produces public materials or public responses is appropriate. So this is about private sins, essentially, and personal offenses, really. So when Jesus addressed the Jewish leadership in Matthew 23 and throughout the Gospels, he didn't practice Matthew 18, but, according to the misinterpretation, but addressed the public errors to the masses, calling them not to follow leaders who would lead them astray from the Lord. So he gives some other examples. He talks about the downgrade controversy and just says this misinterpretation is a corrupt tool in the hands of corrupt leaders, and so we should reject it. And so that's kind of the gist of the passage there, or the article.
This piece is a really good overview for something that is just constant these days. And at the conference, it was brought up several times, just the tendency to punch right and nuance left. And really, Matthew 18 is sort of used as a mechanism to do that, because it's really easy to just do a thought experiment. Somebody, I don't know, and you see this with social media probably the most, because it's where a lot of this happens. But social media is public, right? So you put something out, and everyone can comment on it, right? So if somebody says something more leftward, I don't know, say gay affirming, right? LGBT
not based. Okay.
Something not based. And you are in the same denomination, or you're in the same church, whatever it is, and you say, you call it out. You say this is unbiblical. Then that would be a place to use that's Matthew 18. You should have come to me.
Right.
Now do the reverse. Somebody said something, I don't know, Trumpy, pro-Trump, I don't know, whatever
based.
It is.
Something based.
Then you'll have an absolute dog pile of everyone publicly. And in fact, not just like a rush to condemn. Like you need to be the first person to condemn this publicly.
Oh yeah.
Regardless of where you see this.
I remember January 6th, like every Christian leader was tripping over themselves to try to like beat the other ones to condemn what was happening. And it was so discouraging to be someone who actually attended the rally and didn't even know what was happening in the Capitol. The vast majority of people being outside, to get home and look at your social media, and everyone that you respect is condemning you. And it's like, there's no one talked to you, right? But it doesn't apply in that situation. You're right. So unequal weights and measures. All right. Well, if you're ready to move on, we can go to the next article.
Yeah.
This is an article on climate activism and comparing it to a false gospel. And so it starts, the first line is, Pope Francis believes that a record cold spell in Mongolia is the result of global warming, which why should I not be surprised that Pope Francis thinks this? Every time you see the name Pope Francis in public, in a news article or a blog or social media, it's always followed by a sentence that has something to do with an endorsement of leftist activity every time.
You can keep a picture in your pocket for every time somebody who goes home, who converts back to who goes the Roman road, so to say. You can just pull it out. Why won't you convert this guy?
Yeah.
This is the reason why I can never, because of this is your
You
guy.
don't even have to like make a doctrinal argument. You don't have to know about imputed versus infused righteousness. You should, but if you just whip out a picture of Pope Francis, it should suffice.
It's Frank. It's Frank.
I remember this actually happened to me at a conference. A Catholic came up to me and I, basically, said I wasn't Catholic. And he's like, well, I'll pray that you come home. And I don't know, I was actually confused at first because no one had ever said that to me. And I was like, I'm at a conference. I mean, I'm going home tomorrow. Like, but he meant like come home to a Catholic church. And then I asked him about Pope Francis. And this was when Pope, was it Benedict was still alive. And he's like, he had this whole like conspiracy about Francis wasn't truly the Pope and Benedict was, and Benedict's still alive. And you don't even have that now. So what do you do? Anyway, this isn't about the Pope, but it's about global warming. So the Pope, he said it'd be fine for the Pope to remind believers to be good stewards of God's creation, but this is exactly the problem. It's hard to take seriously when it's a nonsensical lie. And so he's assuming off the top that a lot of this is lies. I just did a podcast actually a few weeks ago with a scientist in England about global warming. Really eye-opening. A lot of the stuff that we hear is just not true. It's fudged numbers, and then of course, tying it to man's activity is very dubious. But so he talks about more about, I don't know. He takes a few more shots at Pope Francis. We'll just skip past that. This guy's not Catholic, and nor would he be writing for Truthscript.
Definitely not Catholic.
Definitely not Catholic. And neither is the Pope, so they have that in common. The Pope is not the only one saying silly things about climate change. Last month, the Atlantic magazine ran a headline. So he talks about the mainstream media. They're pushing this really hard. They blame conflicts for it, which is funny to me, that like wars, they have actual reasons for the wars. And they'll say, no, it's actually global warming. That's what's causing these wars. It's what's causing everything. And so there's a religious element to it when you start making it the explainer for everything, right? This is what Christians do with sin, right? It becomes all evil is rooted back to where there's a sin nature that all evil that humans produce there's a sin nature. And that's a religious kind of argument. With this, it's like everything has to root back to climate change somehow. That's fundamentally a religious argument. And he talks about it being an obsession. That's an understatement. And how the climate actually belongs to God. It's the domain of God. God gave man to care over the environment, over his creation. And we ought to be good stewards. So that's good, right? We ought to be conservationists in that sense. But the climate is not part of our jurisdiction. Like, we actually don't have the authority perhaps we think we do, or the influence. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. This is what God has promised. That those patterns are going to continue. Doesn't mean we can't mess stuff up in our micro, or the areas we live, our micro ecosystems. But you're not going to mess it up to the extent that the climate change people think you are capable of messing stuff up. So he talks about the Baal and Asherah cults being climate centered, and talks about Elijah when he told Ahab that there would be no rain for 3 years. He did so knowing that Baal, whose supposed job was rain, would not be able to make a single drop of it. And so this worship of the climate, this is like in all indigenous religions, all animistic religions, it always goes back to that, right? Like fertility and for good crops, and we need rain, we need sunshine to grow them, and that really is their worship. And this is kind of the same thing. And they call their god Mother Nature. She demands obedience. Her weapon is weather events. And then you contrast this with the true gospel. Our sins are far worse than harming Mother Nature. Our sins are rebellion against the God of heaven and earth, who holds all things. And the hope, of course, is that God sent his son Christ to be the sacrifice for us. One of the things, it's not in the article, but it came to my mind. They were playing at the gym. This is where we've already talked about movies. I'll just keep that going. They were playing the Godzilla, or the King Kong Godzilla movie. I don't know. There's so many of them now. I don't even know which one it is. Might be the first one. And the premise of so many of those Godzilla movies comes back to climate change. A lot of the alien movies now come back to climate change. Like the aliens are going to come, you're destroying your planet. We're here to help you. But, with Godzilla and King Kong, Godzilla specifically in this fantasy movie is coming back to basically avenge the planet that we've polluted it so much. It belongs to these creatures. It's Godzilla, godlike, right? These godlike creatures that are going to really give us justice. And you could say that's a fantasy, but the fantasies reflect something that we believe to be true about the world. And so I even think some of these fantasy movies, they're conveying false worldviews implicitly. It may not be something that's overt, but it's something that you kind of assume as you go through it that, yeah, of course, man's doing this and we're going to get our comeuppance one day. We're going to get judged. And the only way to keep from getting judged is we got to do our penance. We got to works righteousness, carbon credits, and that kind of thing. So it functions just like a religion.
Yeah, the line in this one that kind of hit me the most was, he said they don't care for the environment, they only care for the climate. So it doesn't actually have to, like, this movement of environmentalism that is driving the climate change hysteria is it's a religious one, and he lays out a good case for that, but it's also it's pretty heartless because there isn't an actual care and concern for the land itself, and because the people are attached to it, and instead it's literally just about temperature. And being about temperature, it's he didn't go into this, but I think you could say it's sort of a modern Babel as well. So if we get everyone together, then we can build a tower that reaches toward heaven, which in this case is the version is we can bring the temperature down a few degrees, but we'll save the planet. We're going to save everybody. We can do it, because nothing is impossible for humans if we just put our heads together.
Yeah. All right. Well, the next article is called "The Doctrine of Apostasy," and I'm honestly a little tempted to skip it just because not because it's a bad article. It's a great article, but because of time constraints. And this would actually
I can give a quick overview of it because I
okay.
So
go for it.
Junis is he's a pastor in Finland. I actually just want to kind of give him a shout out real quick. Junis Lanhen, I believe, and I'm sorry, Junis, if I pronounce your name incorrectly, but
that might be the second name we got wrong. It's the second last name we got wrong in this podcast, possibly.
Oh, it's possible, but in our defense, we had a Finnish uncle, and we could only pronounce his name, but none of his relatives. So,
I think, yeah, because didn't Mom? She told us she gave us like an alternative name for his sister. It wasn't actually
Tertu Tati. That was what we called her.
Right, but that wasn't her name.
That wasn't her name. That wasn't her actual name.
What? I don't even know what her name was.
I don't know.
She's my aunt.
We'll have to ask Junis. He probably can tell.
Okay, all right.
So he is actually the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Finland, and he is he's a theologian. His pieces are probably our most theological. So Truthscript is meant to be for laymen, so that they're accessible to laymen. These ones are trying to break down more complex theological principles into a little bit more bite-sized chunks. But even with that, this one is still a little bit long. So this is actually a follow-up to an article that he wrote a few weeks ago about once saved, always saved verse perseverance of the saints. And so he lays out the case that those two things aren't exactly the same. That perseverance of the saints is the more biblical way to describe what is often described as once saved, always saved. So this article is a follow-up to if it's once saved, always saved, or what we call perseverance of the saints. How do you address people who fall away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he lays out the case that really that is a doctrine. When people apostatize, and we live in an age of apostasy. I mean, I guess every age is in its own way an age of apostasy, but we've seen, if you grew up a millennial in an evangelical church, you're one of the 5 to 10% who probably still profess who are still in church at this point. And that may be I don't know, maybe that's a little overly negative, but there is a lot of apostasy. All right. So I believe this, but now I decide I don't. Really, a good word for that, I think, would be deconstruction. Now, we don't. Deconstruction supposedly is something different. It's not apostasy. It's not the same thing. It's the same thing. So he doesn't address deconstruction. It's not an article about deconstruction, but he is describing what I think deconstruction is. So if you want to understand deconstruction, take a look at this article. You'll need, a cup of coffee and about 15 minutes, but it's definitely worth the read. Why do people apostatize, and what is the biblical case for that?
Okay, it's called the doctrine of apostasy. So one of the things that we want to do at Truthscript is not just give you culture stuff. We want to give you good theology. So the resources are pretty varied. And that brings us to the next one. No Law Where There Is None on Christian Liberty by Justin Puckett. And of course, a provocative picture here of steaks, beer, and a movie theater. So the steaks, I have to say, though, the steaks.
You could have all at once, some places.
Are there movie theaters that give you steaks and beer?
There are, yeah. They're only in Texas. Well, I don't know if they. Oh no, actually they do have one. It's called a Cinnabar, and you can order like any food. Yeah, Cinnabar, and it's a movie theater, and they don't have them. They don't have them in the Northeast. They have one in Knoxville, but you find them more in Texas. And I went to one in New Mexico once, but they're like you can order any drink. You can get a beer. You can get a. I don't know if you can get a steak, but you can get a pizza. You can get a burger, and they'll bring it to you. And I don't know how we got talking about this, but that's really you can weird. Do all of those Christian liberty things.
All the vices in one place. So you've given information to people listening. If they want all these vices, they can go to a Cinnabar. It even has the word sin in it. So anyway, he says, in 15 years I've been a Christian, I have never heard a sermon on Christian liberty from the pulpit in the churches I have attended. The topic has never come up in the context of a Bible study. So he just talks about this is not something that's talked about much. And I'm trying to think, actually. I think I've heard several sermons on this.
I've heard messages on it, but it's I think maybe it's probably it would be something that you would avoid just because if you mention specific things you're going to trigger people.
Right.
But I think this depends a little bit on what kind of flavor or branch of evangelicalism you're in. It's going to be discussed more in some. It can be discussed in some more than others, I guess.
So he says, first, God does not speak directly in all areas or on all topics. Now, that's controversial, actually, right there. So to some, there are times when a specific issue arises amongst people, and so God sent a word directly on that subject. For example, Paul's confrontation with a certain individual having relations with his father's wife. On the gray areas, assuming there's gray areas, this is you have to exercise Christian liberty. He quotes Romans 14:1. Now accept the one who is weak in faith, but not for the purpose of passing judgment on opinions. I don't know what translation that is, but the whole issue of meat sacrificed to idols and whether you should eat it or not, and some thinking you should, some thinking it's permissible, and others thinking no. This became stuff like that was a big issue, and so it's kind of like. Even in the law, you have case precedent. You have case precedent in Scripture showing you, okay, this is an example that's of a type. There's others that are going to be similar to this. Here's how you navigate it, and you don't pass judgment on the person who engages in activity you may not have the faith to do, but it's not forbidden in Scripture. So, two areas that he wants to look at. That are grayish in his mind is eschatology. Let's see. He goes. Wait. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead here. He says that the areas he wants to talk about are like 8 gray areas: entertainment, dress, worship style, food and drink, alcohol use, tobacco use, Bible translation, medicinal use, career choice, and school choice. And then there's issues. So he's making 2 tiers here that are grayish, and those are things like eschatology, mode of baptism, church government, use of charismatic gifts, and soteriology, theology of how God saves. And I think what he means, because obviously soteriology has elements that are not grayish, but I think he's talking about like the Calvinist, First Arminian, kind of like how you think about that subject. So don't be gray about the gray is the next section. He quotes Romans 14:5. One person judges one day above another judges every day alike. Each person must be fully convinced in his own mind. And what Paul means is it's not about emotions, but a conviction that comes from knowledge. When you have studied deeply on both sides of an issue and have concluded, you have become fully convinced based upon truth. And working through issues is, I think, a lost art, because one of the things that I've noticed, especially since the podcast era has started, and it really, I do lament it, to be honest with you, even though we're doing a podcast, and I think podcasts are helpful. I think they're good when they're used in a good way, but some people have outsourced their thinking to podcasters, right? And you could do that with pastors. You could do that with anyone. Pastors obviously are there for your edification, but there's also issues that you need to work through, and they're complicated. And so, an encouragement to, when you have a question about a topic that's gray, really spend the time. Don't just listen to a podcast and say, I'm just going to adopt what that person says because they said it. Maybe use what they said to help you think through it, but I would encourage you to think through it. So it talks about the meat sacrifice to idol issue and strong versus weak. He talks about these two groups of people. There's a tendency of the weaker brethren in these areas to judge the stronger brethren as being liberal, undisciplined, careless, and possibly unconverted. Tendency of stronger brethren to judge the weak as legalistic, superstitious, and self-righteous. And I've noticed this my whole life. In fact, I've certainly at some points been, I'm sure, in both categories on some issues. And it's hard not to sometimes when something offends your sensibility so much and you just can't imagine how it could be justified in any way, because it's just, it hits all the temptations you have. Or, on the flip side, if it's something that you just aren't tempted by at all, you can't understand how anyone would be tempted by it. And so this creates friction. And so he talks about letting all that we do be done in love. He gets a bunch of scripture passages from 1 John, from 1 Corinthians. And it's, life is not about pleasing ourselves. Christian liberty or freedom is a gift from God. It is the result of Christ's atoning work. We have been set free from the law of sin and death, set free from to righteousness and eternal life. The law of liberty is not about you can do vices. The law of liberty is about you're free now to honor God. And he takes a shot at
this. This is a theological, obviously construct, but you could take this and apply it to society at large as well, because it's on a micro level. It's what's happened with our conception of freedom, and our conception of freedom has become so warped that our conception of freedom can actually influence how we carry this out even in the church or among brothers and sisters in Christ. And he addresses that when he talks about it's my right. So your right to do what? What does that mean that you have the right? What does that mean that you have the freedom? Is it the freedom to do whatever the heck you want? Or is it the freedom to live in an understanding way and lift up your brother, to encourage him, to not do things that would be a stumbling block to him? But that all has to do with your conception of what does it mean to be free? What does liberty actually mean? And what are your rights actually? They're your rights to do good, your rights to do justly and righteously, not to do whatever you feel like because you're allowed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. He finishes the article with just talking about the rights thing you just really went into already, and then giving a flow chart, which I think is good. Asking questions like, is it a sin? Does God permit it? Does it violate your conscience? Is it a moral issue? Is it a right or freedom for you to do it? Do you have to do it? If so, why? Can you build up another brother by not doing it? Is this an opportunity to sacrifice for the sake of a brother? And can you glorify God through it? Great questions to ask when you're faced with those kinds of things. And, let me give a concrete example from my own life. I am not a teetotaler in the sense that I'm not like opposed to having a glass or a bottle or what, not a whole bottle. This sounded bad. A whole bottle or a can or something of beer. I'm not a drinker, and just because I'm not into alcohol, but socially, if I'm in a setting, if I'm with a bunch of Presbyterians or something, and that's what they're doing, I don't have a problem limited, participating there. But the thing is, I'm very aware that there are Christians who have pasts where this has been a problem, or come from traditions where they're just sensitive to that. And I want to be sensitive to that myself just because of that. So it's my personal choice, and I'm not telling anyone else they have to do this, but it's my personal choice. I generally do not have alcohol at my home. If I'm inviting people over and they're coming, I'm not sure whether they drink or not. Like it's not something that I would put on them or pressure them into. So part of that's probably my background, and that's the alcohol issue. But same thing goes for tobacco, I suppose. Like I'm not opposed to smoking a cigar. I probably only do it like maybe one to three times a year, but it's very rare. But I would never want to just assume that someone has the freedom to do that, and so I just want to be sensitive in those areas. It's not a sin to do that. It's just it's something that you just want to be aware of. So anyway, my bunny is looking at a wire. Very. Take it away, David. I gotta do some disciplinary action here.
Okay, all right. You deal with your bunny. Yeah. So another, I guess, application from this piece that Justin gets into a little bit towards the end here is strong versus weak. So like John just said, you don't want to assume. So with the alcohol issue in particular, I know. So I'm not a teetotaler either, but I don't drink very much, and I don't drink very often. And I think part of that I hope, is just maturity. I think I did a little bit more when I was a little younger, and now I got kids, and I have multiple jobs, and I don't have time to sit and have a drink most of the time. But my list of, if I just meet somebody, generally I'm not going to partake in something unless there's trust built around that area. Because there are some people that I will not, I won't do certain things around, period, because I know that it's going to affect them. I think this can be cultural in some ways. I think you're muted, John.
Sorry, yeah, a lot of it's because of our prohibition history, and in other countries, this wouldn't even be a gray area to navigate. It would just be kind of assumed that you drink beer if you're a man, and that's just the common drink.
Yeah. So when I was in Mozambique, I worked for a mission for a while in Southern Africa, and we went into Mozambique. They told us one of the rules was basically no alcohol at all, no tobacco, no alcohol, but especially no alcohol. And there were some people, I think, who were kind of like, this is stupid. What's the point of this? But the culture in that region, alcohol had literally one use. There was only one use for alcohol in that culture. It was to get drunk. There was no other use for it. And it was directly tied to shirking responsibilities for men. So these guys would go to the river where they would plant these palm trees, and then they would tap the palms, and they would make something what they call palm wine, which is they would stay there all day. They would slowly drip, their palm beer basically, and they would get drunk. They would just spend the whole day trying to get drunk. So the entire cultural association with alcohol was it was all negative. It was all sinful. And so in that circumstance, we're just like, okay, so we're not going to partake in this at all. We're not going to bring something in that is completely associated with sin. But it would be different if we were in Germany because it doesn't have the same association. So there is a cultural component to this.
Yeah. And I mean, much more could be said about this, I suppose. I've heard the argument that just because someone's offended by something, you shouldn't be the slave of that. You shouldn't be having to control all your behavior just because someone's offended. So I think there is a time and a place to have a discussion about educating someone on something. Let me give you an example. If someone's offended because they've been conditioned to hate the American flag or something, right? And you're flying a flag at your house and they come over, do you hide the flag before they come? Or do you use it as an opportunity to kind of set them straight on what it means to you and so this is I think the meat sacrifice to idols issue is that situation was there was something associated with sin, like truly associated with sin in running in the background. You had meat that was sacrificed to idols. And you were indirectly, I suppose, participating, not in the worship, but you were in subsidizing the meat or whatever, because you're buying it at a cheaper price and then you're eating it, you're consuming it, which is a wise thing for your family, perhaps financially or whatever. And you're not participating in the sin. So there are things that people are conditioned into thinking are associated with sin that aren't. And I think that you can take that opportunity to maybe educate them on that and say, like, usually it's the left who's like ruined a symbol or ruined something that then people get offended, but they're offended because of actually sinful lying. They've been told a lie about something. So I just wanted to make that quick distinction before we continue. All right, let's get to, do we have one more or two more? Let's see.
One more.
All right, so I can talk about, well, you could talk about two because you so this is like one of the worst movies I've seen in a long time. Unlike The Boys in the Boat, which was one of the best movies I've seen, Civil War was genuinely awful. And so, of course, the title of Civil War is a genuinely terrible movie by John Harris. And I know David added some things to this as well, so credit where credit's due. So basically I say that like the only thing that was good about it is that it ended. And it was very poor quality. There's some spoilers, but frankly, I don't care because none of you should see it. So it starts out with this suicide bomber who's running into a crowd of policemen in New York City who has an American flag. And you're thinking, what in the world? Like, it's so far-fetched that, this patriotic American kind of person is going to be a suicide bomber. But the movie basically describes the rest of the movie. It's scene after scene with these far-fetched things that just like honestly take you out of the movie. Like you have all these questions. How come in the cities they seem to have food and water? There isn't gang violence, but yet there's no trucks going to the cities that are carrying food and water. And yet they're like, there's just so many weird things. Snipers who are hiding in the bushes, but they have rainbow colored hair, and a guy in camo with like really bright sunglasses. Like, what in the world is all that about? Like, it defeats the purpose. But it's a puff piece on journalists. So these journalists are traveling from New York to DC to interview the president. And by the way, the president is basically Trump. He's played by Nick Offerman.
Trump Swanson.
And he's all is that he's a third-term president who disbanded the FBI, used airstrikes against American citizens, banned journalists from the Capitol, and exaggerates his accomplishments. So who does that sound like? That's Trump. It's a Trumpian kind of figure, and he went too far. And to the point that I guess a future Texas that's blue now, maybe, joins up with California and they decide to take things into their own hands. And Florida, I guess, has peels off and stuff. But the real bad guys in the movie, so like you have like a few groups. You have the real genuine bad guys, and those guys are the white rural dwellers, the people in Middle America. They're the bad guys. So there's no urban sprawl of gang warfare or violence. Like, that's not happening. It's, in fact, the violence in the city is like, I think it's a white person with, I think it might have even been a female if I'm not mistaken, but it's like this white person with an American flag, like think of Mel Gibson running in with the flag, that's the violence you're seeing in New York City. I'm pretty sure that it's going to look a little different if things go south. But anyway, the bad people are these guys in Pennsylvania and West Virginia who they're either racist or they'll sell out, they'll kill their own friends for looting. They have no loyalty. They're rude. They're out about money. Like, those are the bad guys. And then the soldiers who in the California and Texas alliance, they are basically incompetent. They win, but they can't, like, they're tricked by a situation at the end where the president sends a decoy out. They're tricked by the decoy. And they use an unbelievable amount of firepower. It's like just unnecessary, unrealistic. And think about stormtroopers who might shoot a little better, you know. And then the good guys are these photojournalists who are completely, well, they range a little bit, but at least the main character and then the coming of age story is this photojournalist who's trying to copy her and she's younger. You know, they're kind of like they're neutral, blank slates. There's no higher purpose guiding them other than we just want to take a picture and upload it so that people can see what's happening. And that's, you know, objective. And so you're supposed to trust the journalists because they're objective and they risk their lives and they're brave and they actually have more sense than the military. And so journalists are the best.
They're actually they're better at doing the military's job than the military, which was pretty incredible to me.
Yeah, we should just like give guns to journalists and tell them to go to Ukraine because they would be able to do a better job, I think.
So, you know, I mean, this is an aside, but you talked about being unbelievable. So if we're still on the quality part of yeah, that's a classic R.N. McIntyre line right there.
Yeah, you don't need journalists enough. You think you do, but you don't. John is technically a journalist, yes.
Well,
I don't know how I feel about that.
He's one of the ones that gets killed like way before these ones. So somehow these ones survived, which means they, you know, they did something wrong, because they weren't true heroes. Although one of them dies in the end. Two of them actually die. Anyway, so like speaking of being unbelievable, so at the end of the film, when they're busting into the White House, basically, if you've ever been to a wedding where the photographer just will not, like, every time you look, like every time you try to look at the bride and groom, the photographer's in the way and they just seem to be everywhere. And you're like, man, I miss weddings before these obnoxious photographers. I'm not saying all, you know, some are better at this than others, but there are.
Just say it. Just say it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. It's the truth.
I don't care if you're a wedding photographer. It's obnoxious.
And they'll get like, you know, I've seen wedding photographers where they literally, like, as they're putting on the ring, they are over the ring, like with their camera. Nobody can see anything because they're over with the camera taking a picture. So that is the journalists in this film, except for they're trying to take pictures of a war. Like they're everywhere, and you wonder why doesn't the military just does this? All I could think was, did this happen in real life? Did they let
everyone just kind of like is okay with it? Even the militia units are like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like,
well, there are points where the photographers actually advance the line. This would be in World War I if you had a charge to the opposite trench, and the first one to get there were the journalists.
Yeah, it's like Star Trek where like all the main officers beam down to risk their lives. Like the journalists are like, you know, the heroes. They're really not supposed to be there, but that's where they end up being.
Yeah. So quality wise, very poorly made film.
Yeah, and boring, really boring, and
very
not a lot
boring.
of action.
I actually fell asleep. I fell asleep within the first 20 minutes, and I woke up when there was a gunshot, and it kind of jolted me awake. So luckily, there were a few moments of some action. Otherwise, I would have slept through the whole thing.
You mean your dreams? There was action in your dreams? More so.
No. There was a brief, and towards the beginning of the film, there was a brief firefight, I think. So that's what woke me up.
Yeah, it was probably your favorite part of the movie when you were asleep.
It was.
The ending was really bad because you expect an explanation at the end. Like the whole time, I thought it was like a mystery. Like, oh, they're gonna explain why there was a secession and why there was a war, and then it just ends. And the only explanation you get is, hey, this guy's kind of like Trump and people didn't like him. Okay. All right. Well, so, all right. We've been too animated about this movie perhaps, but I was annoyed. I can't get that money back. A lot of profanity in it too, by the way. And again, that's another actually issue with the audiophonia. And, you know, is it acceptable to watch a movie with profanity and that kind of thing? And I definitely have my views on it and wanting to think about things, dwell on things that are praiseworthy. This film had nothing redeeming or praiseworthy about it that I can think of. So you're just basically, you're giving yourself a negative. You weed through all this profanity for nothing at the end. So don't go see it. Go see The Boys in the Boat instead. Or The Beautiful Mind. At least I think that's a fine movie as I remember.
You don't even remember what it's about.
I don't remember. There's probably a scene in it. I probably shouldn't say that. It might be something bad I don't remember.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Civil War, and then you said I added. So I just added a little bit about just sort of the nihilistic nature of it. Kirsten Dunst's character, she hasn't been in a lot of films since, I don't know, I guess Spider-Man. That's the only movie I think of that she was in, was the first Spider-Man, which was like over 20 years ago now.
They honestly should have brought Tobey Maguire into Civil War and paid him more than Kristen Dunst, and it would have been a better movie.
Kirsten Dunst seems like somebody who has had a rough 20 years since then. Just a very stale, emotionless performance, and it just felt very, very nihilistic to me. Just like, and it's also ironic. Like, we're talking about something that theoretically this could really happen. And I watched some of the interviews for the actors in this for this film. This is something that could really happen.
Right.
If it could really happen, then you'd think there would be some emotion in it, but it's just bland, stale, meaningless.
Even at the end, when
no
she
higher
dies,
calling, no higher purpose.
You added that the younger photojournalist, she does something stupid, and the older, who played by Kirsten Dunst, is it Kirsten or Kristen? Kristen, I think.
I think it's Kirsten.
Kirsten, whatever. She dies, and as she's dying, the younger photojournalist just takes pictures of her. And it's like, and she's become like Kirsten Dunst. She doesn't feel anything either. It's just this emotionless, like, I don't know.
Just take the antidepressant and and the shot of tequila and move on. That's what it felt like. Just kind of, and
life is meaningless.
Yeah.
So, all right. With that jolly good note, go to Truthscript.com if you want to see any of these read any of these articles, and do us a favor, if you would, share these around. If you like an article, share it on your social media, send it to friends via email, text, whatever. It does help. And, we exist on your support, your donations, and we appreciate all the support, because I know many of you do share. So, all right. Absolutely. Well, God bless, and enjoy the rest of your evening.